everybody. It's that time of the year again. It's Valentine's Day, actually. It's 19 below outside, and not a lot I can do with the bees. Lots of projects I've got my hands in for later on this spring. Bought a lot of stuff, boxes, frames, you name it, queen rearing equipment. But today what we're going to do is make some pollen patties. In the past I've done a couple videos where I did some pollen patty recipes, and every year I just tweak it just a little bit, or try to tweak it just a little bit. I thought last year's recipe was actually pretty good. It did really well. I'd like for it to be a little bit more malleable after it comes out of the freezer and in the hive for a while. I didn't have near the dry out problem that I had the year prior, so that's a good thing. This year I'm just going to tweak the recipe just ever so slightly, not really anything big, any big deal. A couple of the things that I'm going to be doing differently. I'm going to mix it in a 5-gallon bucket this year. It's going to be the same recipe. It's roughly 40 pounds of pollen supplement patty. I use, my recipe last year was 20 pounds of sugar, 10 pounds of pollen substitute. Ultrabee is what I use. 1.25 cups of, or 1.25 cups of lemon juice. I increased it to 1.5 cups of vegetable oil, and then 10 cups of water. Now this year, what I'm going to do just slightly different is I'm still using the same amount of sugar and pollen sub. 20 pounds of sugar, 10 pounds of pollen sub, which I've already got weighed out pretty much. My scale just took a digger partway through weighing it, so I had to kind of eyeball it. But what I'm adjusting, I'm going with 3/4 cup of canola oil with 3/4 cup of vegetable oil. Now I wish I would have had corn oil instead of vegetable oil, because this is just, they call it vegetable oil, but what it really is soybean oil. Canola oil has a little bit more lipids, omega-3 fatty acids and things like that. So does corn oil. The lemon juice, actually, citric acid helps stop bacteria growth, mildew and stuff like that from growing in your hive patties when you store them. You can freeze this recipe. It's great. But one of the things that I'm adjusting is instead of 10 cups of water, today I'm going with 9 cups of water, and I'm substituting 1 cup of water. I'm going to add a cup of honey in there. Honey is hygroscopic, which means it can absorb moisture from the hive. And if you ever have mixed honey with sugar to make candy, for queen candy or anything like that, you'll notice that it stays really, really pliable. And that's something that I want to add in to this and see how the bees react to it. I'm not saying that this is the way you got to do it. This is the way I'm doing it today, and I'm just showing you how I'm doing it. I bought a little tub here, and what I'm going to do is after I mix it in the 5-gallon, I'll place it in the tub, kind of knead it into the tub, put the lid on, and then we'll let it set for a few hours to let everything gel. I do have my drill here with a, it's actually a mortar mixer. So that's what I'm going to use to mix the ingredients together. Now in the past, what I've done is I've literally just dumped all my ingredients in here. I've dumped the sugar and the pollen sub together, mixed that up, and then added things later. But this time what I'm going to do is add the sugar and the water together, mix that up along with the vegetable oil and the honey. And I'm also going to add a few tablespoons of, this is sort of a homemade recipe of Honeybee Healthy that I had sitting around. It's actually been sitting there for a couple of years because I don't really use it much. but it's just got some essential oils. It's got lemongrass oil, it's got spearmint oil, wintergreen oil, and maybe a couple others, but I'm using it very, very, very sparingly. I don't worry about robbing the attractant for the simple reason that I mostly use my pollen patties in the early spring, and that's just not a high robbing time. Hives are relatively not super strong at that point in time, so not a lot of robbing going on during that period. If I do use pollen patties in the fall, I don't really need to because they do bring in a lot of pollen from goldenrod and whatnot. But if I do, I'm not really concerned about robbing during that time. Now I do use pollen patties in the summertime, maybe on mating nukes and things like that to sort of get them going because those hives are a little weaker. But there's a honey flow going on. It's really not that big of a deal. The bigger hives kind of leave mating nukes alone just because there's so much other sources out there, so there's no robbing going on. So without further ado, let's just get going, and this is going to be a quicker video than my past videos. So first thing I'm going to do is dump my sugar into my bucket here. And in the past, I've explained that you know, this is a cheaper method than buying patties from Mann Lake. I make it for roughly half the price because I buy Ultrabee in a 50-pound bag. And you can buy pollen patties, you know, 10 pounds at a time. This is, again, a 40-pound recipe, so this can last quite a while, especially if you don't have a whole lot of hives. And you can adjust the recipe down to whatever you want. But if you only got a few hives, maybe buying patties isn't such a bad thing. So, okay. So there's my sugar in there. And now I'm going to add, I got 9 cups of water, and this is hot water so that I can stir it in real good. And I am going to add a cup of honey in here, actually. All right. I should have brought a scraper. Use a hive tool in here. I don't think I've ever seen a recipe with honey in it, so maybe I make a mistake, I don't know. But I know the honey, it's mine, and I'm not too worried about it. Okay. So the next thing we'll do is I might as well add a cup and a half or 3/4 of a cup of vegetable oil here. And then three-quarters of a cup of canola oil. Like I said, my preference would have been corn oil, but like an idiot, I grabbed vegetable oil thinking it's the same thing, and it's not. Okay, 3/4 of a cup there. Good. And then I'm going to go with a 1.25 cups, I believe, of citric acid. Lemon juice. Okay. then again, like I said, I got this homemade Honeybee Healthy. I don't need a ton of it in there. If the I'll just try to add a few tablespoons in there. This isn't really Honeybee Healthy, like I said. It's just made with sugar syrup. And now the reason the honey, now some people use high fructose corn syrup in their recipe instead of sugar syrup. It's hydroscopic as well, and it keeps it malleable. And I figured honey does the same thing, and honey's probably better for them anyway. So we'll see what's what. But the reason I'm mixing this is because it's just going to be easier to do. I don't have to completely dissolve the sugar in this mix. So what we'll do now is start adding. This is going to get very, very stiff very, very fast. Now what this does is makes about 16.5% protein by weight. Okay, now the rest, and bees need two things, obviously: carbohydrates, which is sugar, that's their energy, and the protein. In the wintertime, they don't eat much protein because they're not really brooding up, and they can't eliminate their waste. So putting pollen patties in too early can be a mistake. I generally put these in somewhere around mid-March, right around April. Let's say in the last couple of years, it's been about April 7th. The first pollen starts coming in, which is mostly maple pollen and a little bit of willow, and then but the bee, during the cold snaps, they're not going to touch. When they're bringing in pollen, they're not going to touch much of this pollen sub, but we get a lot of cold snaps, and during those cold snaps, it might be 3 or 4 days. That's when the bees will feed on your sugar, which is in here, and your pollen sub, so they can keep going and they can rear brood and they can stay in one spot and rear some brood on it. So that's what we're aiming for here. And I'm in central Wisconsin, so everybody's a little bit different. In the past, I've mixed it in this thing, and honestly, I think that mixing in a 5-gallon bucket is just probably the best bet for ease of doing it. Now, I've got a new trick this year, or a new implementation of delivery, a new delivery system. I have a new delivery system this year, which I want to show you. And they're very, very inexpensive to buy, and I don't have to waste time with that aspect of it. And we'll get into that after we've put that in here, and then we'll set this aside for 3 or 4 hours, let it gel, and then I'll come back and show you what I'm talking about. Now I don't want this all gooey. I want this almost like bread dough. That's what I'm aiming for. But I don't want it too dry either. And if we have to add some pollen sub to it, then we will. But right now this is looking pretty darn good. Okie dokie. So that's not too bad, right? And what I want to do okay. This is going to be too much, probably. Okay, so that's 1 pound right there. I can take that patty, I'm going to have to figure out a way to open this bag up a little bit for myself. So after letting this rest for a little while longer, it did firm up pretty good there, actually. So there we go. There's another patty. These cookie bags really or the cat's ass. I'm not gonna lie. This makes this real quick work of this. Seriously. This cut my time by 30% easily. And it's cheaper than wax paper. So I'm kind of just rolling it side to side, filling up the bag from outside to outside, and then I work it from the back to the front, sort of getting it sort of evened out, you know, so it can fit between two hive bodies. Then I'm taking the bag, actually, and I'm opening it. There's a the bottom flap is longer than the top flap, so I'm taking the top flap, holding the long flap inside, and then tucking the bottom flap into that so that it all lays nice and flat. So again, there's a seam here, and that's the long side on the seam. I lay that on the down bottom. I'm just rolling it out from the short side to short side to fill it up. Then I can roll it from front to back, or back to front, I should say. Getting it nice and even. If it squishes out a little bit, so be it. And then you can see the longer is on the bottom, shorter is on the top. I just take the bottom, I kind of fold it a little bit, tuck it inside. Then I take the shorter one and I also fold that inside. And then it lays nice and flat there. Gives it a nice little seal. And again, you flop this on there, you just take your hive tool and you just score it a bunch of times and flop that down, and the bees will do the rest. This works better, this waiting on it a little bit longer, it's set a little bit more nicer for me. So now it makes it really easy to, made it really easy to slice it. The little cakes, and then those just slid in the bag. A lot easier than the ice cream scoop. But if your recipe is a little stickier, ice cream scoop seems to work just fine for it. The rolling pin is really helpful, obviously. Like I was saying, in the early spring is when I feed these generally, and it's to get them through humps. 2 weeks before, you know, I try to put it on right when they're starting to get some cleansing flights in March, when we've got the melt going on. So they have carbs and they have protein that they can access. Now when they start getting pollen patties around here, around April 7th-ish, somewhere around there, you know, they'll ignore the pollen supplement because they're getting fresh pollen, which is understandable. But we always inevitably get cold snaps in there. You know, they can't just bring in pollen every single day because it's going to be raining, or it's going to be snowing, or it's going to get cold, or whatever. And this being on the hive, after they've started their brood rearing with, you know, the queen started laying, and then all of a sudden, you know, they can't bring in any pollen anymore. Well, they have this then to supplement themselves in those 3 or 4 day stretches. And that's the purpose of this. You don't need it generally for if you're just into, you know, honey producing, got a couple colonies. You don't really necessarily need this. You don't need the early brood rearing. But if you're into queen rearing and you're into nukes and you want lots of bees, lots and lots of bees, around here, you know, we have to wait till for our splits till, you know, Memorial weekend or even later. We want to get these hives every bit of advantage that we can, so that we can, you know, get lots and lots of bees, because we're going to be peeling off resources from these hives. And you of course still want some bees left for collecting honey when the honey flow hits. So good population is very, very good when you have that goal in mind. Yeah, man, this is really flying. Can't believe how fast this is going today. Ooh, my first broken bag. 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35. So roughly 35 pounds of supplement is what I ended up making. So we are good. There we go. Excellent. All done. Till next time. Remember, all beekeeping is local. Take care.